Tonight, someone you love is going to die. Not now, maybe not soon. But one day you will stand over a body and you will not know what to do with your hands. That moment, the silence after, the strange fog of it, feels like the most human thing there is. But here is what no one tells you. Your ancestors felt that exact same fog, and what they did next was far stranger than anything you have been taught. Death is not a modern problem, it is the oldest problem. And for most of human history, the people who faced it did not have grief counselors, or funeral homes, or a socially accepted script to follow. They had fire, they had pigment, they had holes in the ground, and they had something else, something that archaeologists are only now beginning to understand. Your ancient ancestors did not just bury their dead, they talked to them. Neanderthals were the first. That surprises most people. You have been told maybe your whole life that Neanderthals were brutish, simple, that they grunted and swung clubs and barely scraped by. But in 1908, in a cave in La Chapelle-aux-Sens in southern France, researchers discovered something that changed everything. A Neanderthal skeleton, roughly 60,000 years old, had been deliberately placed in a shallow pit. His bones showed severe arthritis. His teeth were almost entirely gone. He could not have survived alone, which means someone else kept him alive for years, and when he finally died, someone dug a hole and put him in it with care. That is not the behavior of an animal. That is grief. More sites followed. Shanidar Cave in Iraq, La Ferracie in France, dozens of Neanderthal burials scattered across Europe and the Middle East, some with flower pollen pressed into the sediment around the bones. The archaeologist Ralph Solecki, who excavated Shanidar in the 1960s, argued that the pollen meant flowers had been placed on the bodies. Other researchers have since debated whether the pollen arrived by wind or by bees. But the burial itself, the deliberate placement, the orientation of the body, the care, that part is not debated. Your ancient relatives grieved. But the story gets stranger when you move to our own species, Homo sapiens, roughly 100,000 years ago. At Kafze Cave in Israel, archaeologists found the skeleton of a child buried with the antlers of a fallow deer resting across its arms. The antlers were placed, they were arranged. Someone looked at this dead child and decided that going into the earth with empty arms was not right. What do you do with that image? Because here is what evolutionary anthropologist Paul Pettit has argued after decades of studying mortuary behavior across the Paleolithic. The act of burial is not about the dead. It has never been about the dead. It is about the living. When your ancestor placed flowers on a Neanderthal's body or folded deer antlers into a child's grave, they were not helping the deceased. They were helping themselves survive the unbearable fact that the person was gone. Grief, it turns out, is not a wound. It is a tool. Your brain did not evolve to process loss gracefully. It evolved to keep you alive. And for a social species, for a creature that survives in groups, that stores knowledge in other people, that relies on relationships for food and protection and warmth, the death of a person in your group is not just emotional, it is a survival crisis. It means a hunter is gone, a mother is gone, a memory keeper is gone. Your nervous system registers that loss as a threat, and it floods your body with the same chemistry it uses for physical pain, because for your brain, the two are not different. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar has shown that social bonds in early humans were maintained through physical touch, through grooming, through presence. When that presence is severed, your brain does not immediately update its model of the world. It keeps expecting the person to come back. It keeps sending signals, reach out, look for them, call their name. That is not weakness. That is your brain doing exactly what it was built to do. And so your ancestors built rituals, not because they were told to, not because a religion handed them a script, but because their brains needed somewhere to put the unbearable energy of loss. The burial was the ritual, the grave was the container. But here is the twist. For tens of thousands of years, burial was not the default. Across sub-Saharan Africa, across parts of Asia, across the ancient Americas, many cultures did not bury their dead at all. They practiced what archaeologists call excarnation, the deliberate exposure of a body to the elements, to birds, to the sun until the bones were clean. Then the bones were collected. Then they were kept. Your ancestor might have carried the skull of their dead mother for years. At Ain Ghazal in Jordan, one of the earliest known large human settlements, archaeologists found dozens of human skulls that had been removed from their buried bodies, plastered over with lime, given painted eyes, and displayed upright. Some had been buried a second time, in groups carefully arranged. The researchers who uncovered these plastered skulls, Gary Rolifson and Zaidan Kafafi, described them as portraits. The dead were being preserved, their faces were being reconstructed. The living were looking at them. These were not trophies, they were ancestors. They were being consulted. In cultures across the ancient world, the dead did not leave. They moved into a different category of presence. They became advisors, protectors, judges. The grave was not an ending, it was a relocation. Your ancestor did not think of death the way you do, as an absence, as a void. They thought of it as a transition to a different kind of nearness. The dead were still there, they were just harder to reach. And your brain, your modern brain in your modern body, is still running that same software. Researchers like George Bonanno at Columbia University have spent decades studying grief in contemporary populations and found something that surprised everyone. Most people, after significant loss, do not require clinical intervention. They grieve and then they stabilize. They find what Bonanno calls resilience, not because they stop missing the person, but because the relationship does not end. It transforms. People talk to the dead. They visit graves. They hold objects. They hear a song and feel the person beside them. That is not denial. That is your brain doing the ancient thing, maintaining the bond, keeping the relationship alive in a new form. The word for this in psychology is continuing bonds theory, developed by researchers Dennis Klass, Phyllis Silverman, and Stephen Nickman in the 1990s. For generations, grief therapy had told people that the goal was detachment, that healing meant letting go. Klass and his colleagues looked at bereaved parents, at widows and widowers, at people across cultures, and found the opposite was true. The people who healed were not the ones who severed the bond. They were the ones who transformed it. They kept talking to their dead. They kept including them. That is exactly what your ancestor was doing with the plastered skull and painted eyes. You have been taught to see ancient burial rituals as primitive, as superstition, as the fumbling gestures of people who did not yet understand death. But the more archaeology uncovers, the more the picture inverts. The ochre painted bones in South Africa, 100,000 years old. The cave walls covered with handprints, hands reaching out of darkness. The grave goods, the tools and pigment and food placed beside bodies because someone believed the dead would need them. These were not primitive gestures, they were sophisticated ones. They were the acts of minds that had grasped something vast, that the self does not simply vanish, that the love does not simply stop, and found ways to hold that truth. The ochre is the oldest. Red ochre, iron oxide ground into powder, found dusted over bodies in burial sites across Africa, Europe, and Australia. The color of blood, the color of life being returned to the dead. Your ancestor knelt in the dirt and painted a body red. They were saying something, something that did not require language to mean. And tonight, or someday soon, you will stand in that same silence. The fog will come. Your hands will not know what to do. You will want to call the person's name, and the wanting will feel childish and irrational and unbearably human. But now you know, it is not irrational at all. It is ancient, it is adaptive. It is the oldest surviving technology your species ever invented. You were built for loss, and loss was built into you so that love could be real. That moment when you do not know what to do with your hands, you have been preparing for it for 60,000 years.